Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us as we discuss Warp and Weft, Weaving Sustainable Places. So we're going to talk about how the call for sustainability has led to increasing innovation in textile materials, supply chains, and business models. But what we're also seeing now is this kind of emergent creativity in materials but also materiality. And it's not just non-digital, sometimes it's actually very amplified by digital. And we've heard a lot about how this innovation has led to disruption in textile production, textile processes, but it's also changed how we interpret place with respect to textiles. And we're going to discuss examples of how increased association with place or ideas of place through R&D and technology, regardless of where you're actually geographically located, is driving some of this sustainable innovation in fashion and textiles. So I would like to introduce Dr. Kate Goldsworthy and Dr. Don Ellams joining us here. They actually work together at the Center for Circular Design at the University of the Arts London on a program entitled Circular Materials, Models, and Mindsets. And now they're both involved in the two key research councils, creative industries clusters, Kate with Business of Fashion, Textiles, and Technology, and Dawn with Future Fashion Factory. And to tell you just a little bit more about those programs. So Kate is a designer and academic. She focuses on materials and manufacturing innovation, and she's the co-founder of the Center for Circular Design, and she's now deputy director of the Business of Fashion, Textiles, and Technology, the partnership cluster. And to tell you just a bit more about BFTT, that's a 5-year grant that focuses on delivering sustainable innovation within the entire fashion and textile supply chain. And Dawn is a researcher, designer, and educator who comes with specialist expertise in textiles technology, and she'll tell us more about that, and complex cross-discipline collaborations for innovation. And she's now based at the Royal College of Art with Future Fashion Factory. And Future Fashion Factory is an R&D partnership that explores and develops new digital and advanced textile technologies to boost the design of high-value creative products. And last but not least, I'll tell you a bit about myself. So I'm Dr. Noshua Watson. I'm the founder of Interwoven Impact, and we provide social impact analytics for creative companies. And we actually got our start in sustainable fashion events production. And we're best known for our Ethically Woven event series that we produced in collaboration with the Ministry of Sound, Conscious Fashion Campaign, and the UN Office for Partnerships. But I think kind of true to the spirit of Beyond, we use digital technologies basically to develop our internal capabilities in measuring the impact of our events and develop new products and services. So first, actually, I think we maybe should all get on the same page. And if you could quickly define sustainability and circularity in textiles and materials. What does that mean?
So circularity is an economy within industry, so where we're trying to utilize resources at every stage before ultimately recapturing and regenerating materials. In doing this, we're creating sustainability in practice in the industry.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting as well to think about circularity in terms of place, in that, the place is the planet and the resources are finite. And so I guess, sustainability is the goal, but maybe circularity is the way we get there. It's a way for industry to emulate ecological systems to keep things in flow.
Okay, so these actually, in a sense, are systems that already exist, systems that we may have moved away from, but already understand, in a sense, or have already seen in some ways. So could you give some examples, for example, from the clusters that you lead of sustainable or circular materials technologies, and particularly ones that build, say, local capabilities in that respect, bring back that sense of place?
I guess in terms of BFTT, we have numerous projects, SME projects at the moment, who are looking particularly at reusing waste streams. And of course, waste streams are specific to place. So whether it's a Nana Sanam, redeveloping fibers from agricultural waste in the pineapple industry in the Philippines, through to companies like Kirsty McDougall, who are looking very specifically at waste from the fashion industry to sort of rejuvenate back into high-end fashion materials. It's really, the novelty and the experimentation, innovation going on in industry around waste and recycling is incredible, I think, in the project.
So Don, before you respond to that, can you give some examples, though, of maybe some of the geographical limitations, for example, with reusing those waste streams, given the span of supply chains in the textile industry?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in terms of the waste streams, particularly in the textile and fashion industry, many of them are not really even calculated or common knowledge yet. We've got companies like Reverse Resources who are uncovering all the time sort of new waste streams that are really internal to industry. They're not waste streams that have been out there in the market and sort of circulating at all. So I think just uncovering, identifying waste streams and then employing the right technology in the right place to deal with it. So, whether you're thinking about synthetics or natural materials, and increasingly from food waste sort of supply chains, it's incredibly specific, I think, to the place they're emerging from.
So Dawn, do you have some examples of these sustainable or circular technologies?
So we have a project that's working specifically with waste wool and cashmere's Inuit, and this is really interesting because it's bringing in old technology. So that was originated in Yorkshire in 1813 back into kind of just modern day production. So it's not, in a sense, that innovative in terms of the machine, but there's a need for it. And there's collaboration happening across supply chains, which is really interesting. So it means you can create these local and very bespoke waste streams, which create innovative products. In terms of other new materials that are happening, we have Myco, which is creating a bio leather, so a mycelium leather. And again, specific to the Yorkshire area, there's also a hemp producer, and there's a specific waste product that's been identified that actually fertilizes the mycelium. So because they're local to each other, they've connected through Future Fashion Factory, they're actually tapping into that waste stream and utilizing it. So that's really interesting. And then I think also we have the materials that they're not looking at waste streams, but they're creating new circular systems, so new materials, looking at regenerative agriculture. So Saltico is really interesting, looking at land which can't actually, it's not fertile enough for food crops, so they can create these cellulose plants, which we can extract cellulose fibre from, in very circular and holistic systems, and they can be regional throughout the UK. So they have a pilot plot up in Scotland and then one in Cambridgeshire, and that's really interesting because that's looking at the regenerative farming model. And then again, as Kate said, tapping into food and beauty product waste streams, so looking at other industries and specifically kind of extracting chemicals, so looking at finishing of materials, so existing materials, and where do we kind of create less impact in our finishing processes. So a designer-driven project is looking at holistic coloration, so with Rose Danford Phillip, and that's a really nice project because we're looking at a whole new approach to coloration, and that could go across any fibre, so cellulose, proteins, or synthetics, and again, how do we work small scale, how do we set up those regional supply chains?
So you've named two really interesting technologies or concepts. So first, can you tell us a bit more about regenerative agriculture and why that matters to sustainable textiles?
Yeah, so this is really interesting because it's tapping into this kind of, these regional models, and how can we create more fertile land, which actually could, through regenerating and using it for a textile crop, could ultimately, maybe 5-10 years down the line, have food crop on that field. There's lots of land across the UK that does need these regenerative models. It also kind of looks into carbon carbon capture, and we need new metrics, so we need to kind of work with those new research and innovation, so there's potential there. And then also, I suppose, what new fibres can we create? Again, historically, fibres that may have existed but no longer are in use, so that's quite interesting to look at.
So, and then you also mentioned new coloration technologies. What exactly does coloration mean in the sense of textile production?
Yeah, so colour is often overlooked within sustainable fashion and textiles, and it's everywhere. We're all in some kind of coloured garment. Even if you're wearing a white garment, it's got a finish on there, it's been bleached. It might have an optic on so it looks brighter. And they are really, pretty nasty chemicals, but they work. So there tends not to be a lot of R&D going in them. And when we look at sustainable colour, it tends to be natural. And the food, the beauty industry, they have lots of byproducts that could go into fashion and textiles. And again, looking at holistics, when we talk about holistic, it means we're not going to use harsh chemicals to fix colour to fabric. So we're looking at kind of more innovation in how we apply colour to fibres as well.
Okay, so one last question about what you've just discussed is you've mentioned a lot of projects in Yorkshire. Mm-hmm. So what does that mean? And how are you basically kind of reviving this heritage but developing new technologies?
I think we're creating more, these local supply chains, but actually we're tapping into global exports, but also designers can be based anywhere. So we're collaborating with manufacture with designers that often aren't in the same city or the same region, but through kind of digital technologies, that's being enabled, which is really interesting, and it's opening up those supply chains. But it's tapping into a heritage industry and finding new innovative ways of developing it for kind of modern consumers.
Great, thanks. Kate, so can you tell us what types of R&D initiatives you've seen in order to develop materials or enhance the supply chain, and then maybe some examples of the role that geography plays or doesn't play as a result?
I think it's really interesting, that sort of conversation about textiles and local heritage, because a lot of the projects are based very firmly in a place where there's a history of, whether it's Yorkshire with 200 years of shoddy, or, perhaps in London with more of the design and production in fashion in the Stratford area. It's really key, that sense of not forgetting the tradition and the heritage, but using innovation and technology to update it. And I think one of the things we've really seen is, I guess, if you're working with circular materials, you're connecting waste stream, you're creating effectively new materials, and that then requires you to look back further into the supply chain and redesign parts of that. And what we're seeing quite a lot of is companies realizing they have to bring that innovation in-house in order to work with the novel materials they're creating. So, for example, a company called Anna Glover, who produces beautiful luxury wallpaper. She wanted to make a circular product. It started off with a simple question: it's fine, I'll just replace my polyester wall coverings with an rPET, with a recycled polyester. But the quality wasn't there for the luxury market, so she ended up having to develop the textile herself from scratch, and then subsequently developed a whole production capability, had to move into bigger premises, and can now respond on a kind of a bespoke luxury model with those recycled materials. So she's created a whole system, in a way, sort of within that technological leap. And there are sort of other projects that have done similar things.
Actually, could you tell us a bit more about some of those projects, and then maybe about, as you've mentioned, some of the issues in supply chains, and particularly, these global supply chains. Could you give some more examples of those?
Yeah, I think, one project that really springs to mind is Plan B, which is one of our newer SMEs companies that we're working with. And again, they're working with recycled polyester and workwear. So they have a very definite supply chain. They have brilliant opportunities for take back en masse, because their products are really sort of, sold in bulk and retained for a certain amount of time. And they wanted to develop something that was 100% circular, but again, they had to create the technology in partnership in order to be able to feed that system. So they've developed something that means that their textile products can be recovered like plastic bottles are, kind of flaked and re-extruded, and the equipment didn't exist for that. So it's incredible how, if you look back through the supply chain, those supply chains aren't joined up yet, and perhaps that's where circularity is key. You deep dive at the nodes around the supply chain, around the system, but then it's about how you join them up.
So you've actually mentioned several different, I guess, types of circularity in the sense of, you have the option to use, say, recycled materials, or the option to do, say, a take-back program, take back, used finished product, or other options like using waste streams from other industries, altogether. I was just wondering if you had, either of you have any other examples of those different kinds of circularity.
I mean, maybe coming back a little bit to the regenerative agriculture or the biospace, I think it's, the synthetic recovery space is really progressing at pace, and, the materials landscape there is less complex. But with the natural materials, the biomaterials, the regenerated cellulosics, they, in theory, in circular theory, are able to go back into the biosphere to be composted, biodegraded. But it's so interesting when you look at a product-specific context. So, for example, we were looking with Pinatex about end-of-life options for their particular materials, which are completely compostable, biodegradable.
So Pinatex is pineapple.
Pineapple. Okay. So it's a cellulosic material. It's not been through any kind of synthesis in terms of fiber production. But the reality is that we don't have the infrastructure, the systems for composting yet. So even within industrial composting, the network we have in the UK, quite often that kind of material would just be refused entry at the door. It doesn't look like the kind of material that normally is developed there.
Yeah, I was wondering, Dawn, if you have any examples of basically, how do we scale these processes?
I think one of the huge challenges is about the system. So actually, whatever new material, whatever recycled material we create, we have to start to be able to trace it. So we're working with IBM in terms of creating a material platform. So we're looking at how can we use technologies at the very start of fiber production right through to end of life. So Kate knows this is so complex for end of life recycling. If we're going to talk about circularity, it's very technical how we break down what we're all wearing back into a fibre, and how can kind of traceability, how can creating some kind of materials library, what do we need to use at each stage, how do we get different parts of our supply chain to talk to each other, and can keep that communication while consumers are involved back to collection point. And certainly on a UK scale, that's really, we don't have any kind of real investment going on in there, so that's what we desperately need. The research is happening, and it's about getting those solutions to market, I think.
And I think you've touched on kind of a major misconception where a lot of the efforts in this area have been at the consumer level, but you've both mentioned systems. Where do you think maybe we've missed the mark, or where we need to put more emphasis?
I mean, I think it's really because we import a lot of fibres, so we spin things, we weave them, but again, it is just about that traceability, and then how, we are educating consumers, but how do we, so we don't have textile recycling, we don't have a bin in our household for that, we have plastic, we have cardboard, we have waste, we have food waste, so I think, having things like that, having a textile collection, and then understanding how it's sorted, I think
you're right. I mean, sorting is, it's the the really unglamorous end of fashion. If you've ever been to one of these sorting facilities, but it's so important to start looking at that resource as exactly that, a resource. And the interesting thing is, I think with circularity and certainly chemical recovery, we're not there yet. There's no market pull yet because it's not at commercial scale. And when you talk to the sorters, the feedstock providers, they're ready to switch systems once that market pull is there. And actually already we've been doing some research for a report that we're bringing out probably in the new year around circular synthetic systems. And we've identified 5 different archetypes of waste materials that will effectively become the raw materials for circularity when it's pulled through the system. But in the meantime, I think there's a lot of simplifying in a way. If you use the word recycling, there are as many different types of recycling as there are of creating a fibre in the first place. So we have to be more specific and understand very particular systems, I think.
So you just used the word fashion, and we've just been talking about sustainable fashion without using the word fashion intentionally. And so why are we using the word textiles? Why are we emphasizing textiles more than fashion, particularly when we talk about these systems?
I mean, to me, they go hand in hand, but I feel like they overlap. Obviously, textile is the basis for everything we wear, but it's also much more. It's drives the medical industry, the space industry, automotive communications. It's literally, we say, from advertising to agriculture. And I think another thing that's been fascinating in terms of skills and jobs in the area, once we're talking about sustainability and circularity, there's a whole host of industries that are wrapped into textiles and fashion that don't exist yet, or that certainly are not included when we're talking about textiles and fashion.
Yeah, I think fashion is an application for high-value waste streams. So textiles is the source of our waste streams and our fibres, and where we need to see how we can up value. And then I think fashion is kind of where the market, high-value, slow production within the UK fits. So maybe that's as well some of the difference.
But what you're saying, though, is that there's a variety of end uses that we're not paying enough attention to, such as, you said, automotive, communications. Sorry, there were a couple of more.
Medical space. I mean, almost every industry.
Yeah.
But I think fashion has also become, I suppose, an example of almost where it can go a bit wrong. And I think the public awareness of kind of how we deal with fashion and the huge amount of materials going through our system has become so widely discussed that it's useful to, everyone experiences clothing. So I think it's a useful way to talk about these systems.
Yeah.
So you raised the point about people fit into these systems as well, and you're both not only designers and researchers, you're also educators. So actually, Dawn, if you could start, and if you could give us some examples of how we can build designers' capacities to learn and innovate and work with these new, not just materials, but new systems, and especially, say, at a distance, again, given these supply chains.
Yeah, I mean, I think in education, it is about having more of a technical awareness as a designer. So understanding, and that's where digital tools and platforms can help understand the environmental impact at the various stage as you're designing, as you're creating a product. I think it's really important to remember industry designers and upskilling and how we get the new knowledge to them and how they access it as well. So through the R&D collaborations that we're both projects are looking at, we have designers really engaging with them and often driving the technology and really pushing the science and saying, I want this, and they're learning through being able to do that. So I think having these funding pots is really valuable as well. And then, also looking at places like UKFT, Society of Stylists and Colourists, what can they offer, what programs are there? And again, our projects, how can we keep sharing the knowledge? How can we keep engaging at a cost-effective way, so that if you are a micro or an SME, you can access this R&D, you can access this knowledge. It's really important.
I think there's a real acceleration as well, isn't there, of knowledge. I mean, the project that Dawn and I worked on a few years ago was really about how you build tools to collaborate in a multidisciplinary group, which you need to do when you're dealing with circularity, and it's incredibly complex. Yeah. But with every step, you have to carry that new knowledge and insight forward and start from a higher point. And I think, trying to prepare, I suppose, designers of the future for that constant shifting of technology is a really big task. But I mean, one of the preoccupations at the moment for me is trying to build life cycle analysis and impact insight into the design process. And we can start to do that now through a lot of the really interesting technology developments. So it's really about understanding, if I change, this particular material in this particular way, or I make something in a different location, or I design it for a different lifespan, how can I really quantify what that impact will be at the point when I make the decision. And that's a really exciting area, I think.
Yeah, and I think as well, if there's a move to kind of dematerialization, so 3D prototyping, so not having to make things in the real, and that's going to be great for kind of the younger generation coming through, but that's going to be really problematic for existing industry. So, making sure that we have that technology is accessible and that it's not synced in either to just one kind of provider, is going to be really important.
Yeah. So then, once we have designers who, whether they're coming through, say, formal education, and they're informed about ways to integrate, these concerns, but also technologies into their development processes. But we also have ways of continuing to educate people in the field. Then, where are we going? What's going to come out of this? What kind of, end uses for these textiles, these new textiles, are we going to come up with? What are some of the new, more, say, sustainable markets, are we going to see? What's the future? Why are we doing this?
I think there's some really interesting things happening with like microfactories. So Pattern Project is a really lovely example of how, they're already using kind of coding to change body sizes of a standard pattern. You can then either go in and pick up your product, or you can make it yourself. So I think some of the new technology, if we keep it scalable, so like the Mycelium project, they're developing a manufacturing chamber, and that would be something that a huge company could scale up, or a micro factory could also have in-house. So I think maybe looking more at these regional kind of hubs of creativity, and then also that will add a uniqueness to the area, because it would be nice to think, you can get certain materials, certain finishing, because they're tapping into these waste streams. Whereas if, you're down south or up north, there's just that little bit of difference.
I think the whole idea of a local system and a regionally focused system, perhaps COVID has focused our minds on that even more, but the resilience of supply chains in the future, I think, will be all the stronger for being able to deal with waste sort of, on site as it occurs, and also microfactories, the kind of technologies that are allowing us to make on demand. Hopefully we prevent a lot of the waste from happening in the first place. So I think, trying to think small but act big somehow with these incredible local systems. So,
we're talking about textiles, but both of you have actually mentioned digitally enabled solutions. And so I'm wondering if you could maybe give some more examples for, like you mentioned, the Pattern Project, of ways that digital technologies actually enable us to make more tangible stuff.
I know there's a project in Future Fashion Factory that's looking at nowcasting. So it's kind of how making fashion forecasting more accurate, so that you don't make loads of stuff that goes to waste. You don't make until you need it, and you make it right first time. And that's really interesting. And at first I was a little bit uncomfortable as a designer, I won't lie. And now I really think it's an amazing, it's really an innovative thinking, and it's about data. So large data supporting these design decisions, going right into manufacturing, rather than kind of taking design decisions away from a designer. They are in control of it, they're getting information, and I think that's quite interesting.
I think, an example I would pick from BFTT would probably be Segura Systems with their sustainable supplier marketplace. So they're They're a traceability, a trackability company, and they can show a company's entire supply chain and give transparency, through several tiers of production, which is incredibly difficult. But what they've been working with us on is a way of integrating sort of validated certification on producers. So it could be that a company in the UK wants to find a producer, perhaps a very traditional small-scale producer across the other side of the world, but they can do that through this system and then continue to trace and track products. So I think, only digital technology really can do that at speed.
Yeah.
Did you have any other examples from the clusters that you lead that you wanted to share with us?
There's so many that I would be like...
Difficult, isn't it? I suppose the one that's been almost on the tip of my tongue in several of these discussions has been Black Horse Lane Atelier. And it's been one of our longer projects, and they're developing the first UK denim finishing lab. And it's incredible to think that we've got so much incredible denim heritage in this country, but still you'd have to go to Europe, to Turkey, to Italy to get the denim finished and then shipped back. Yeah. So they're starting from scratch with sustainable and circular technology. They're going to have a fantastic sort of new technology that can naturally dye the denim with kind of inputs that are based on food waste, laser technology. So it's all going to happen in-house in their London lab, and they also want to share that with university students.
Okay, and Dawn, one last...
I'd have to probably say a project that we did with A.W. Hainsworth that was about short-run bespoke. So one of the biggest barriers that SME and micro-designers have is accessing short-run. And they have developed this technology where you can have a jacquard weave, a very bespoke one to your brand, and you can have minimum quantities. And that's been great, and it's been one of their best sellers. So it's been a real success story, and it's part of their sustainability agenda now because it's reduced waste for them as well. So that's great. And I think Matty Boven has won some prizes for innovation with that material. So it's been really successful.
So I just want to say thank you to Dr. Kate Goldsworthy and Dr. Dawn Ellams for your insights on sustainability and circularity in textiles and the recent innovations that we've seen.
Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.